Dostoevsky once said, "People don't want truth. They want comfort dressed as truth." And also Kafka said, "Reality is too heavy for most people to carry. So they borrow illusions, soft dreams, sweet lies, and call it happiness." So the question is, do you want comfort or do you want the truth?
Hello, good evening and welcome to another Webster report on this Sunday, the 5th of April, 2026. Lot of Easter celebrations going on today. Something that's always not too far from my mind in these days is the traditions that I was brought up in again. You know, we seem to accept a lot of these traditions as being truth because we don't see any problems with them until we start digging in a bit. But then it comes down to, is it personal taste? Is it personal issues? I know I spoke to you briefly about it through the week, Alex, and you know, you don't really see, well, I wouldn't say a problem with it, but it's not a massive issue. But you know what I'm like with these things, so it plays on my mind that, you know, the day that people with Easter eggs are celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, us being in the middle of Passover week, he's actually gone to the cross today. So, you know, that like, that would rankle with me. That would be like me, you know, like when I was a kid, I used to get Christmas presents, but that's your birthday as well. So I'd get one present and it was for Christmas and birthday. So I was celebrating my birthday as a non-special day for me on another day. So what we're doing is, well, we're saying, well, we'll celebrate you on this day that has nothing to do with you. That messes with my head. I know it doesn't seem to bother a lot of people, but you know, I have an issue with things like that, mate. But good evening. How are you anyway, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. And I get it. I mean, I think there's definitely, it's not that it doesn't bother me. It's just that when I look at all the things that bother me, there are lots of things that bother me more. So I just, you know, I look at it and I put it down to, and I've just been having a debate with a guy online who's generally quite shrewd, smart, shamanic type guy. I have a lot of respect for him. But he started exploiting a lot of the Easter memes, but in a similar way, the overlay of a pagan festival, but then using it to go down the path of, you know, criticizing the whole Christian tradition while using some of its language. So the problem with the critique is it can go in a number of ways. It can go in a Christ-centered way, in a Christ-orientated way, or it can go in a Christ-attacking way, the people who will attack the church and its traditions in order to undermine Jesus. So this is why I have a sort of I don't have a view that specifically looks at the distortions, but what's interesting, I think, is that word celebration, because celebrations actually is now a brand of chocolates, and there'll be a lot of people, actually, a lot of young people growing up who've perhaps, you know, started at school and not really doing that well with their English language, could probably relate more to celebrations as chocolates that they've seen spread out at a time like this, rather than actually, as you would have had in traditional training in school, that the word celebration actually used to mean that you were celebrating something meaningful, perhaps, rather than something trivial. So I do think that it goes even deeper. Our very language, what is it to celebrate? I mean, you know, it's an interesting thing. Generally, we tend to think of happy occasions. Now, Hollywood likes happy endings. So it's no surprise, really, that celebrations have become all about happy endings. They all lived happily ever after. Isn't it wonderful? Share a little piece of chocolate. You know, socialize your children into sharing a piece of chocolate. That all is a trivialized version of celebration because it's something that's enjoyed. So most people tend to think that celebration is about things that we enjoy. I would suggest that being crucified on a cross was perhaps not a particularly enjoyable experience. And even when we celebrate, you know, it's a bit like double-edged, because we're not actually celebrating his pain. We might feel pain about the pain he bore for us. So even the word celebration has to be used with a considerable amount of, I think, reflection and caution. You know, why is it a celebration? And again, that's lost. They're not even asking a question. Like I said, they'd rather see a celebration as a little piece of chocolate that you can get for about $3.99 from the shop.
Well, it's, you know, since all these things started to matter to me, Alex, you know, work hard, pay your bills, all that stuff. It was all these other traditions as well that hit me in the face. Why do we go to the chippy on Good Friday? I mean, Friday night is a chippy night anyway, but why is it, you know, then it's this fish thing. Then we see where these fish came about, you know, secret codes for other Christians at one point. But then we've got to get to this term Christians again, because Catholics claim to be Christians, yet they don't seem to follow what Jesus says, and, you know, seem to contradict a lot in the Bible. And I'm not just picking on the Catholics, because the Church of England's no better. I've not found any Christian religion that I would say, you follow that, because you all have they all have their own takes on it. You know, you've got to come to our building, we've got to assess you for a few months, then we'll tell you if you're ready to move on. You know, that never happened with me, Alex. It kind of happened with you, where you were coached into something. But when you, after that coaching, shall we put it, when you actually became born again, you had so many questions that they said they preferred you when you weren't a believer. Now, that's a very strange comment. And then I pass that over to all these apologetics that I see. I know that Reverend Russ, that used to come on the show, I know he was going off into the apologetics. But all I see, Alex, is trying to win points. I see people saying, oh, I see where you're going. I see where you're going. That's a good move. That's a good move. And I'm thinking, you're playing chess with your eternity. Because if this Bible's true, there's a lot of people in a lot of trouble. If the Bible's false, none of it matters, Alex. Nobody's in trouble. Anything goes. You know, people say, well, morals just come from being good. Well, now, where does that come from? Because we used to give up our firstborn quite easily. You know, and we've always killed and fought for power. What's changed? But why do we have this good? We see there's a story that tells us why the Old Testament was old, why there was all this bloodshed, what happened to these people, what changed, what was fulfilled, what was forecast. You know, you see a to-ing and fro-ing in a story that is just evolves as it more and more background and more flesh comes into those words. When you then bring First Enoch in, you see this flowering, you see this budding, you know, and I don't see that in any of these religions. I don't see that in any of these churches. Do as you're told. Come and see me. Don't do that. Don't do this. That's not what this says. So when it comes down to Passover for a strange reason, you know, we don't know where we're at with calendars, but in our Gregorian calendar started on Wednesday and it goes to Wednesday. So in between all that, we've got 3 days and 3 nights. So we've got a looking for the Last Supper being last night, arrested early hours today, on the cross, dead by 3 o'clock, entombed. So that's like scriptural to fit into what comes from Passover, because he ate Passover and then this happened and he fulfilled the Passover because that was the foreshadowing the lamb. So that is kind of important to me. But to be way off, I mean, I think it's 3 years ago, Passover was 22nd of April. 31st of March was Easter Sunday. So we've got a big discrepancy there. And it's like, well, I worship Jesus every day. But it's these holidays that get all missed out. And then, well, that's just for the Jews. Or I'm only New Testament. And I don't know, from reading the Bible, Alex, I don't know where people come up with all that, you know, traditional stuff. But it's traditional stuff that I was taught, you know, but because of all the lies, mate, it makes me question everything. And you know that I'm a little bit picky on some things.
Well, Luke, I mean, there's probably a number of ways you could approach these issues. And as you were talking, I was thinking, well, you know, what would be a novel way that people haven't heard me share before? And I thought, well, there's a simple word that people will recognize, sociology. And if you look at what sociology essentially is, it is the study of all types of imaginable groups and the interactions within groups and across groups, different groups in society. So you had Emil Durkheim, who was a functionalist who described society like different organs in the body that are in some sort of relationship, maybe some communication between those organs. Society as a whole is like a body with the various organs within it. And that was a macro theory. That was a large-scale theory of society. Then you had Marx's conflict theory, which was also a macro theory that looked at like the relationship between often things like international forces and how the conflict theory, how they sort of jar against each other, and how they define the framing conditions for individuals. Then you had Weber and symbolic interactionism, which was a micro level approach that looked at the influence that we have within culture in our relationships and in our small communities that can shape the bigger picture. I'm not going to go on about the guy who synthesized all that too much, Jürgen Habermas, who developed a system where the macro and micro could be integrated. And he talked about systems as big picture issues and life worlds as the arenas that we operate within. And then he said there was a lot of overlaps and talked about systems and subsystems. Pretty sophisticated was Habermas. But the point about sociology in general, the reason I just went on that detour is to say that sociology isn't a monolith. It's not just a word. It is about study of society, but you can study it in a number of different ways and from a number of different perspectives. But the point that all sociology will speak to is that in relating between one individual and another, or one group and another, there's this interface between them. And there are these often complex dynamics where even in international relations on a big scale, you get things like realpolitik, where people have to become realistic about their strategy with respect to the rest of the world, because the rest of the world isn't making the types of decisions that we want them to make. So how are we going to influence them? One of the ways is war, when we don't get our own way. Prior to war, we've got diplomacy in various sorts of modes and molds. So the problem with that is, all through life, we experience every day that people have to compromise in order to be able to function. This is an absolute given of social reality that every child learns from the more or less the moment it's born. The more conscious you become, there's a trade-off. In order for me to get this in this social setting, I might need to give up this or that. So a people pleaser, for example, which I was for a long time in my life from being very young as a way of surviving, gives up certain things in order to oil the social cogs, in order to make sure that the prevailing conditions are not harmful to me. So it's a kind of it's called prophylaxis in chess. You engage in maneuvers proactively that prevent the rebound harm that would happen if you didn't do that. So people are constantly compensating. They're making trade-offs. Even healthy people have to do that. But if it becomes entrenched in your psychology, it can become an unhealthy compensation. It can become dysfunctional. So what you've got to be aware of, when you take that and apply it to people sat within religious institutions, more often than not, most individuals like to tender out truth claims and the veracity, truthfulness of those claims to external authority. Because every time you are the one who has to ratify a claim, anybody could tap you on the shoulder, Big Brother, or just a person in the pew next to you and tell you that you're wrong. So people decide that they prefer a frictionless life because friction causes heat, often unpleasant energy. So in this game of trade-offs, so many people decide to make trade-offs in a particular way where they sacrifice their autonomy for acceptance. This is pretty much staple in a lot of theories, like Gabor Mate talks about trauma, for example. To maintain your authentic selfhood in the face of the pressure of groups, we know, talking in terms of young people, that phrase peer pressure is often bandied around in sociology, that shapes people's behaviours, where they sell out on what they might really think and believe in order to fit into a group. And I think that little tour that I've done using sociology and fleshing it out probably gives the reason why humans do it, whether they're in non-religious institutions or in churches, because effectively human nature, like water, is very good at ingressing and finding the weak point to get in. Human nature prefers the easier path, and I think that's probably one of the reasons Jesus talks about the narrow path and the broad path that leads to destruction. The narrow path is not easy at all, because it means you are going to have to be the fish that often swims against the stream. Now, you shouldn't have to do that in a church. In theory, that's the place where everybody believes in Jesus comes together and we create this wonderful kingdom under his authority. However, it still doesn't work out. It should do, but it doesn't. That's telling you something about human nature and just how resistant it is to favouring autonomy over acceptance. Most people go the acceptance route, Paul. Me and you, for example, have not had that luxury, or we've chosen not to take it, put it that way.
Well, it's not a case of that for me, because what I was brought up, what I was taught was, you know, those fundamental things in life. When I know that they aren't true, then about fitting in suddenly means this isn't a really good thing. Just because everybody does it, it doesn't mean it's a good thing. We should have learned this from history, shouldn't we? You know, we point the fingers a lot to history, to all these bad people that are there. But where does all our self-righteousness come from, Alex? You know, the wide path means, well, you know, whatever you're doing under your own roof with consenting adults is okay. Well, how, you know, where does that end? Because just that is enough to take you where this world's going, which is to hell, destroyed. This is the old. This has to go. This has only been stretched out to a point where everybody's going to get the chance to see and know the truth. Getting bogged down on questions of, you know, when Jesus was born. Show me where it says that we are meant to know that. All we can do is surmise. But when you've got all the pagan deities on the 25th of December, and we see Jesus, who is crucified in Passover week, being put into Ishtar weekend, then you've got an issue there to at least know, well, that's, everybody celebrates it there. The Christians do. That's wrong. It's got to be wrong. If we want to look about where when John's born, I think there's a date for when John's born, and there's months between John and Jesus. We can look at that. But all we need to know is that that's wrong. So where do we look for in Scripture? Well, God's got his holidays. They're not just Jewish. And if you want to say they're just Jewish, a Jew is a born-again believer, Gentile or Jew. It's not ethnicity. This is the persons that God talks about. I'm not interested in your ethnicity, in your persons. I'm interested in, do you believe? That's it. And we're getting lost in all that. And that's what I mean about this tradition that's hammered home. You know, happy Easter, people wishing me happy Easter. So, you know, if could I take offense, Alex? Can I stamp my feet? Can I go and shout? Can I go and wave a flag somewhere about this? Or
Yeah.
would it be me that would get wrapped up like a chicken and put in back of a van?
Yeah, you can protest, but most people will look at you like you're an alien, obviously, because they like that's the whole point about assumptions. Everybody, more or less, tends to share them. So it's difficult. I mean, when you mentioned, you know, distinction has to be made, I think, between, say, the festivals, and we could say a lot about that. But where you started with morals, and under the same roof, the privacy argument, what you do in your own roof, morality. Like we were saying last week, morality is a slippery slope, because morality always comes in and people use it when there's decay, because it's the last glue that they feel that they can use, because morality is very black and white. It's like this side of the line's right, the other side of the line's wrong. And then, of course, everyone should ask the critical question, like Karl Marx did, well, who's defining which side of the line is right and wrong? And even if a human says, well, God does, and I'm just speaking on behalf of God, that person's going to go, hold on. That sounds a little bit like you're making claims that your view is right because God said it. Now, then we're into the position of going, well, yeah, of course, because God gave the laws, the 10 Commandments. Fair enough.
That's what the state of Israel are claiming.
Well, exactly. But what does it mean in practice? Now, I think it's not so much about morals. It's about, as we said last week, covenants. As soon as you move, if you move to be explicitly to behavior rather than covenant is relationship, morals is conduct. David was immoral, but he was in covenantal relationship with God, who looked upon his heart. Therefore, he was immoral within the covenant, but that wasn't the most important thing. He suffered the consequences because God didn't let him off scot-free, but neither did he condemn him like he did Saul. Saul basically went against the covenant that God had set in place with him. He kind of, in a way, usurped God's authority. David didn't do that. He was a bit of a naughty lad when he saw a lass, for instance, stood on a rooftop and thought, I fancy a bit of that. And yeah, it's dodgy,
Right.
it's immoral, but the bottom line was it's a different sort of rupture. So what we have to always remember with the gospel is, like I said many times, Jesus didn't just die, John 3:16, so that we could all get our creedal formulas out to get our beliefs right and be saved eternally. It's like Jesus was the means by which fellowship with God was restored as a possibility. But you've still got to choose that fellowship with God. Anything that puts anything above that is distracting fundamentally from the core. So everything that we say, even if there are errors in the church, the primary error that the church is making when it's doing that is not moral. And it's not even about following prescriptions or not following prescriptions. It's about, is this undermining what it's like to be in a relationship with Almighty God? And if it is undermining it, that's when it's a problem.
Well, maybe not undermining it, but it takes me back to Pilgrim's Progress, where they're walking that path that's rocky and it's all jagged, and they look over the wall and it's like a green pasture. And they say, well, look, it goes in the same direction. We'll just follow the wall. And the wall doubles and peels off. Well,
Yeah.
As soon as you start saying, well, all I have to do is say 5 Hail Marys and show up once a week, or just show up once a week, or just do these things and then do everything else normal, because your establishment is not saying what's actually in these scriptures. If they claim they go off the Bible, people argue about these translations. With that, you heard me say it so many times, Alex, the lexicon shows you what is a good translation. You can see that the NIV has got a lot of problems with it, with verses being moved and removed and words being changed. I saw somebody this week say, that's it, they're throwing the KJV away, they're just sticking with the Geneva. They're pointing to the powers and the principalities and the authorities. King James didn't want everybody to point at him because that's what the Geneva Bible was saying. He wanted a different word, which was government. It didn't look like it was him because there was government. That is part of the fraud. But because you've got a lexicon, because you've got a dictionary, this shouldn't stop you. And this is why when people say they need to go to churches or speak to scholars, a Muslim friend of mine says that the Quran's not for him to understand because he's not a scholar, whereas the Bible says that's not what that's not what we're saying here. We're saying, come and have a one-to-one relationship. Come and read. I will teach you. So it's about everybody going and learning and working on this word, the bread. You can't see it any plainer.
Yeah.
And that is a standout thing. It goes against every religion, Alex. So if all the religions all seem to kind of agree that they don't want to follow the Bible, and they've all got fingers in all these financial pies and all these geographical pies, you just can't help but see there's a bit of a Babylon system here that we've been groomed into, that we're still stuck in, that everybody's arguing out that they've got the remedy to get out. That title thing that I was talking about, the clouded property titles, all the titles that we've registered are clouded, which means that in commerce they can mess about. Somebody come back with me today to say that it doesn't matter. It's useless to correct the title. I don't understand that. I'm still waiting as to why it's not worth doing, but to think that we've been taught to do that, but it's worthless to correct. I thought, what is going on here? You're either doing that on purpose, you don't understand, and you shouldn't be talking to people to telling people what to do. If you ask people questions like, did you register it with this title? Yes, that's what I was taught. Right. Well, this causes an issue because under presumption, it could be commercial. So if they treat it and presume it as commercial, and you turn up and accept what they're saying, you're going to be a debtor. Or if you don't turn up, you're going to be a debtor and found in absence on their presumption. So to say that, to correct that is useless. You either have a dog in the fight here that you're trying to make it even cloudier, or you shouldn't be going about and offering people advice. You know, so many people that you know as well as I do, people who came to us years ago who had been put in a position where they were going to lose their houses over council tax. And they were going in with, I've no contract, they were going in with fund terrorism. And you think some of them were real, you know, squeaky misses, and some, it was too late. Some had even took, you know, court injunctions out, trying to put liens on because of the, you know, because of getting all this mixed up. You've got to be cold with this and calculated. And when you stand there and you see these people act how they act, it was turning the light on, Alex, and seeing the cockroaches run. Nobody turned these lights on. And now look at it. There's people putting lights on everywhere. If we were, I always say, if we were 10 years ago, mate, things would have changed already. But, you know, all we can do is, I've had so many messages privately that, you know, because of the conversations we've had on the show, that there's people doing stuff, you know, just because you might not be seeing it everywhere, there are people doing stuff. And I've spoken to some of those people offline, and you know, there's people who have been entrenched into some of this stuff for 5 or 6 years on the fight. So you've just got to leave it with the Lord, mate, because there's nothing that we can do about it. Worrying about it, even though this is easier to say than it is to act it. You know, hats off to people who suffer with panic attacks, anxiety, PTSD, because I know until I went through it, I couldn't understand who I was dealing with, because I dealt with it a lot in the prison service. To actually get an understanding of why people can go really, really off the trolleys because things have been taken out of the control. It's you know, you're in an 8x10, you can't get a toilet roll with it, and you know, sometimes cell bells don't get answered for a while. That toilet roll is something that they've no control over. That's the point of liberty. You know, you've done a crime. This is what you have to put up with. But when you see it affect people, and you see traumas come out of people that you know haven't been done to them in jail, you know, 3 weeks on number one on the server, and the next thing you know, he's cutting himself open and stuffing things inside himself, and he doesn't know why. You know, these are, you get an understanding of seeing it, but when you actually experience some of this stuff, mate, and it's all to do with authority, when things are taken out of your control. So when you realize that you've been taught something that's wrong, and you should be able to go and easily correct it, even going into these vipers' dens, but you couldn't, and they're using armed police. It was like, we need people to go and do this. And you know, when you see council tax go up 70% in 5 years, where a bailiff's firm is being given a customer every minute, all presumed on fraud, man, and we shouldn't correct that title. You know, how does that thought go? So I put the same with the scripture. You said it early doors. We should all be on the same rock. This is the foundation. Well, I believe before everything goes bad, we'll be taken away. Where do you find that? Come and show us now. Let's do it. We're all here. Let's look. But it's no, that's what we believe, or that's what we were taught. Well, it's not good enough for me. Work hard, pay your bills, Alex. And it means something to me. So it's very strange to be sat here, because it's like quite a mournful day. It's a mournful week, because we know that with everything that's going on, with everything that's being pressed, you know, follow the plan and all that. Look at what's exploded with Trump now. I mean, he's getting booed. He's getting booed at some of his own events because of what's going on. Is this part of the plan, mate? Because I've never seen the world like this. It's a real, oh, no, it is. Oh, yes, it isn't. Everything's getting mixed up.
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot of bases there. I've started off with theology and the church, then the Babylonian system, and we come back to theology.
It's all involved, isn't it?
It is. It's not easy to untangle it all, Paul. It's really quite challenging. But before we carry on any further, I've noticed there's no comments in the chat, but there's 20 people watching. Is there anything where the comments have been disabled?
No, there's loads of comments.
I can't see any of them.
They're there, mate.
In
fact, me directors just said about we lose our lawful right to property. We're registering property, but because it's clouded, the equity's not being registered because they're always sitting on the public, on the debtor's side. So clearing that title up clears the property up. There's equity in there. A woman has registered that property. There's equity there. Men and women can own property. Mr. and Mrs. can't. And this is why we need to correct the title. Sorry for interjecting there, mate. You crack on. But there's comments there, mate.
I've just seen them now. They weren't showing up before. Yeah, well, as we know, all these things are connected. Now, for those people who are not believers, they might not necessarily see any connection between the things that are going on in the world, the levels of corruption that we're seeing, the levels of oppression that we're experiencing. But again, I mean, I suppose, they'll come on and say, yeah, well, what Trump's doing, he's deliberately doing all this to make himself unpopular because this part of the plan, right? And he's actually showing us how corrupt the system is. Even the system of politics is completely corrupt. And this is what he's doing. He's showing us, even by sacrificing himself, he's telling all of us very clearly, let go of all this. And he's oppressing us on purpose because it's for our own good. So that when diesel and petrol prices go up so much, particularly diesel, so that your second-hand trading value of your diesel, if they decide to get rid of it, is gone. And everyone's going to move to petrol. Yeah, that's all part of the plan as well. It's to give you the pain.
Electric's cheapest now, mate. Electric's cheapest.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that could all be claimed to be Trump giving us pain so that we realise and wake up. So it's very difficult for anybody to look at everything that's going on, feel the pain, be detached enough to analyse it, and if they've not got a theological frame, then I really don't know what they would make of it.
You become compliant. Enough pain, just
yeah.
Enough. Keep it going. It's a good training mechanism,
Or maybe
we are kept in a fight and flight mode.
Maybe you become a prepper. I bumped into Steve earlier today in the chapel, and he was coming up, and he was the most chatty I've known him for ages. And he was asking me, have you got any food? Have you got food in? How much have you got in? And he's Christian, but he's a prepper as well, and he has been for some time. So he's got all his plans in place. He absolutely believes it's all coming down, and believes it's coming down soon. A lot of people do. A lot of people are very pessimistic about where it's going with the fuel, and that it's a manufactured crisis, which we know it's a manufactured crisis. So, yeah, some people are saying, yeah, well, spiritual or not, be prepared. And some people are prepping. They think it's that close.
It can't go on like it is. I mean, they are doing predictions by the 10th of April, Europe will have run out of oil. It doesn't need to be a prediction. They just need to do what they're doing. Toilet rolls will start going soon. It's been a proven mechanism for them, Alex. But how do you've seen the amount of people that we speak to, and it's hard to get through on so many levels because it's not quite affecting their lives just yet. It's enough for them to make them, grind the teeth and get a bit angry. But, Netflix is still on and football's still playing, and you can still get Kit Kats at the shop. They're a bit dearer. Everything's gone up, but we can complain about that. And I mean, Storm Dave, mate. They gave this Storm Dave this big up. Like the last time, and it was a woman's name last time. The back wall got took down, mate, from 2 houses. This hasn't even blown the toothpaste out my gutter that fell out my window. So I don't know if I missed it, if I slept through it. I know people who didn't go travelling because of this storm. Yet I know somebody who's been to Edinburgh and back over the weekend. So what do we know is really going on, mate? The Straits of Hormuz, or the Straits of Trump, as Trump referred to it, tongue in cheek. We just can't work it out, mate.
Well, the thing about that rubbish about by the 10th of April, Europe will have run out of oil. It's clearly a lie. So it's propaganda, because at the end of the day, Straits of Hormuz delivers about 20% of the world's oil through that area.
Yeah.
So 20% of the world's oil, that doesn't mean the whole of Europe runs out of oil. It's just pure nonsense. And yet we've been told, anyone who does the research can see that Hormuz contributes 20%. So the whole of Europe, which is one of the biggest consumers on the planet of oil, that suddenly it just runs out of oil is nonsense. So you can tell that the narrative is preparing the way for what they're going to impose on the grounds that we've run out of oil when we haven't. So what it's doing is just telegraphing what the plan is. It's to shut everything down and to say, well, that's it. Everything's just gone belly up because of this, and blame it on Iran or whoever, or blame it on Trump. And the people who are pulling Trump's strings, they'll throw Trump under the bus like anyone else. And the thing about Trump was, I mean, what's really interesting for me is this phenomenon of populism, and it's worth talking about. Tommy Robinson, for example, is a populist who is not a politician. So he has the freedom, a bit like Jesus didn't have a dog collar or wasn't officially a rabbi. He had the freedom to walk around, and they called him rabbi because they recognized his authority. It was informal. Tommy Robinson's a populist who is not an advocate or a representative of some bigger institution that pays his wages. He calls himself a journalist, but he's a freelancer. He does his own thing, which means he has a lot of freedom. Now, of course, Rupert Law,
he has a big influence from Israel.
Yeah, but regardless, we can talk about covert influences, but realistically, he is not going to get censored. There's no way Tommy Robinson, apart from by the main authorities who are trying to shut him down. So if you look at Rupert Law's a populist. No different. Trump was a populist before he got elected. Nigel Farage was a populist before he got to the stage with reform. Well, actually, in Europe, at least for 30 years, he was fighting against the European machine. He got us a referendum. Then he set up various parties. Now it's finally reformed. He was a populist. As soon as he could potentially get into power, he could no longer be a populist. Because basically,
do as he's told.
The public space that everybody lives within, the public space is controlled. And the public space requires a political face. There's a bit of poetry for you. You've got to wear a political face. So Trump was a populist for a long time, right? But suddenly now, even though he was the president of No More Wars, he's no longer a populist. He's just doing his own thing. That's the major shift. Now, Rupert Law in this country, he rises up and he says, it's disgraceful what Farage did to myself. He tried to stitch me up. It's disgraceful that he doesn't support Tommy Robinson. Then Elon Musk comes in and says he'll support Katie Hopkins and he'll support Restore Britain. But it's easy, isn't it? It's very easy for Rupert Law, as a populist with nothing at stake, with no prospect of getting to power, to tear a strip off Farage, because he's a populist. And Rupert Law, bless him, he's not exactly the sharpest tool in the box, is he? So at the end of the day, Farage is a lot smarter than Rupert Law, and he understands much better what you have to do if you're going to be any kind of credible voice in a political arena. You can't be a popular unless you're the Green Party. If you're the Greens, you can be a populist. And why can you be a populist if you're the Greens? Because you're no threat to the system. Because
so what is Farage now? Is he a Tory again?
Well, he's not a populist. He can't afford to be a populist. Or only Zach Polanski and the Greens could be imposed populist because they're insane. So their policies are so deranged that they are no threat to the status quo. The status quo can absorb those policies.
According to polls that I saw today, Reform are leading, and the Greens are in second. Law is way down. Restore Britain's way down the channel.
Yeah, all he'll do is undermine. All he'll do is undermine reform. And the whole point, when Corbyn crawled out from under a rock, that's all to attack Farage and reform. Ed Davey, he's not bothered about the Liberal Democrats being in power. He just wants to do strange dances and slag off reform. Politics of grievance, I think, is Keir Starmer's chosen words about reform and restore Britain. So you've got Corbyn, you've got Polanski, you've got the Greens, you've got it from all Lib Dems, you've got it from every single one of them.
The Greens.
Say again.
Polanski,
Polanski's the Green. Yeah, so you've got Ed Davey, Keir Starmer, Polanski as part of the Greens, Corbyn also as a left, trying to unite the left and trying to connect together with Polanski. Then on the so-called right, you've got Rupert Law, who's biting into Farage's market share. So Rupert Law's a populist. So from a populist point of view, he can attack Farage and say, why is Farage not supporting Tommy Robinson? So he gets Katie Hopkins on board, Tommy's on board, and they'll all push towards Restore Britain. So they're all, these people who get called controlled opposition, they are all taking the share, diluting Farage's share, so that Farage doesn't get in the Westminster set, because he's the only one who could create any problems for them. But even then, he'd have to make trade-offs. When I was talking about sociology and realpolitik, he would have to make concessions like, I can't be seen to support Tommy Robinson, because he can't. He can't. No politician at the present time. There's more likelihood of being a bloody and violent revolution in this country than Restore Britain getting into power, because a populist cannot be allowed into that place unless it's Zach Polanski, because he can then be completely twisted because he's a retard.
It doesn't sound very good, any of these choices. Martin pointed out that the Greens are communists in part with Islamists. Well,
yeah.
Well, communists is socialists. We've got, Labour's following a certain manifesto. Tories aren't offering much more. Farage is carrying on policies that all the above of wanting or put in place. Surely people can see that voting isn't going to be an option. There's got to be some kind. I mean, somebody's talking about a general strike, but we've heard this for years, Alex. We should do this. The amount of people that say we should just stop paying council tax. Just stop. You've got so many people who are so lost in this world who don't know, they've got kids, they've got all kinds of threats against them now. And it's so easy from a keyboard to just do that when I've not paid for 15 years. Well, what does that mean? Do you mean nobody comes and knocks? Does this not happen? What about if you've got kids and you're worried about opening the door or, all this stuff now? It's not as simple as it could have been. I think back to when I first ever saw one of these joint gyros, Alex, and it was 1990. I remember seeing it. It was attached to every bill my mum had. And I just thought, all those years it was there. Wonder what if back then we'd have done something. What if? And it's, it's the simplicity of that. Why are we now arguing about all those bits, all those fragments? Let's go to where this started. it's obviously through this registration process we're losing power from something because of what we're being taught. So if we look at what we've been taught and we reverse that, that can't be a bad thing for me, mate. You know, it would wake up society that you've been acting in a system voluntarily. And anyone who says, I didn't know, that's no excuse. It's there for you to go and read it. But, you know, Bills of Exchange, it's not a short novel. You know, I think you've written the book, mate. It's a pretty thick book, that.
Yeah, no, quite a few, yeah. And it is, yeah, writing books is perilous. It takes a lot of time. Yeah, I mean, realistically, when you look at the scene now politically in this country and abroad, it's a complete mess in the West. Trump has got no credibility. I'm struggling to understand what he could possibly think he could have to gain by maintaining the line that he has. But the question now, of course, is when he said, yeah, you know, we'll pull out within a couple of weeks or so, maybe a couple of weeks. It's just given enough time to ramp up, and then they'll be able to say, "Oh right, yeah, we've finally solved the problem. We're pulling out." And a lot of it is giving Keir Starmer. It's making Keir Starmer look good. I mean, that's almost impossible. It's making him look like a statesman. So this whole exercise has served a lot of different purposes. It's increased inflation again, right? It's just basically enable them to double down in lots of areas that they want to double down, to talk about shortages, lockdowns, rationing of things. And it just means they're preparing us because, again, it just promulgates fear. I mean, when I was speaking with Steve this morning, I'd never known him speak for so long. He just come up, I'm having my breakfast, we're here. He comes up, and he must have stayed with us for a minute. If he left to get his phone, I thought he'd come back again. I've never known him so animated. And
I bet he's dug tunnels.
I wouldn't be surprised if he has. But he was really focused on it, proper into the prepping, and it made me realise that, I mean, he's a handy lad. He can look after himself, but I wouldn't say he was obsessed, but he was pretty much fixated on the state of the world. And, you know, while I'm not saying that it's not going on, what are we going to do? We're going to wait, and we're going to see what they'll do anyway. So within a couple of weeks or so, I would imagine in a couple of Sundays' time, we'll be having a very interesting Webster report. If the electricity's not, if the lights haven't gone out by then, and the internet's not been shut down,
I really don't know how this is going to play out. You know, really don't. I think on a world scale, I don't think taking the information we're getting, every country's in a pretty bad way. Like I said last week, I think it was the European Parliament have voted for mass deportations on a Trump style scale. What does that mean about us then? What are we going to do? You know, we just keep seeing all these numbers about DWP and that being checking people on benefits again now and all this stuff. Yet all these people who haven't got any of this stuff aren't being checked. It's like the collateral is being squeezed dry. So
yeah,
I think we're in uncharted territory because you can't fix this debt-based economy. It's not something that you can just keep running on. You know, there's reasons why we've never been balancing the book for a start. Am I back?
Yeah. I think you're back.
Where did it go?
You just froze with it. He just froze. I didn't know if the problem was at my end of yours, but it looks like it was at yours. But yeah, I mean, Luke, the thing is now as well, these May elections, you're going to have to take proof of ID. So you have to take your passport or something. So you can see that because of what happened in Gorton and Denton and other things, that this is all being used as a pretext to just tighten what people will have to do in order to be able to do simple things like voting like they used to. They'll probably still end postal votes, of course, with postal votes, which you can do loads of voter fraud. You don't have to prove any ID there. They just send it to your address, and any Tom, Dick, or Harry can fill it in. But if you're going to vote at the polling station, you've got to prove that you are who you say you are. So you're probably better, if you want to commit fraud, just asking for a postal vote.
Well, contracts have been given to like companies like Palantir, the American companies. Now, under the Patriot Act, the American government, the FBI, and that have got access to all those files because it's an American registered company. But they're contracted by the UK government to collect all this data for this digital system, and we're already in progress because it's a test, Alex. You've given consent because you've used the NHS. You know, you've not been well. You've gone here. You've done that. We've been taught to do all this. It's all been our consent. So even though it's say no to digital ID, it's there. It's there already. It's like, you know, it was like when I said I went to county court and it was you got a hearing, so you couldn't be heard. And that's what you're doing now. You're telling them that they can't do this. So what are they operating under? They're operating under a completely different jurisdiction and they can't hear you. What do you do with that? Because we're meant to go and get justice. They're the gatekeepers. What do you do? Well, you go to the police and tell them, look at what these naughty men and women are doing. And they're all involved in it. And then we look at politicians being linked with grooming gangs and being covered up. Then we link secret societies that they're also part of that go to a court case where all police must declare that they're of a certain secret society, mate. And that's going to be fought in high court. Can you imagine that getting beat? Bloody hell, it won't be a good system, or I'd be very suspect that it was what's going on there. They've allowed that. You know, these things are all connected. That's why when you said about that broad subject, theological to geopolitical, you can't get away from anything. But Coronation Street's on in between, Alex, and you've done a 40-hour week and you've had your kids to football and to ballet and to dance and to pictures and pizzas, and, you know, you're knackered at the end of the day while you're funding all the world that's going on around you. And you can't do it anymore. People are being priced out of everything. They can't pay a council tax, so they want to know how to get out of it. A tax that they shouldn't be paying, a tax that I know people who have taken their own lives because of harassment from it.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're taught to do this. Can people not piece this stuff together? You know, I do recognize patterns, but that's not a real magnificent pattern. It's like we said last week, if it quacks, it must be a cow then, because we're seeing it plainly, yet people can't see it. So there's something not right. And it's almost like, I think you said it, Alex, that society's traumatized. That trust society's now made everybody suspect. You know, kids can't play on the street because there's a paedophile behind every lamppost. There possibly is these days, but I remember a time that it wasn't. But then you look back and people say, well, maybe you know, they're just better at catching them now. No, that's how they get around all these disabilities that have sprung up from nowhere, where there were 1 in so many thousands in the 80s to 1 in 10. 1 in 8 that have got some kind of aversion. There's a common denominator here, and it's these, you know, safe and secure stuff that we're pumping into a body that should be able to cleanse itself in theory, but we don't work on that theory. It's all the other theories, like, well, we need to go to vegetable oil and we turn the mountain upside down. We've seen all this done in our lifetime, Alex. You know, kids, and you see kids now, they don't see it. They don't know that things that were going on in the 80s. I saw a clip from the guitarist of Linkin Park. he said his daughter, she said she wanted to do this thing at school, and she'd written a song and she was going to play guitar and sing. He said she can't play guitar because she's only been doing it 2 weeks. She can't play it. And she said, well, you should do this, and she should play the chord like this. And she like rolled her eyes at him and as if to say, leave me alone. And the mum went to him and said, no, you should listen to your dad. You know, he knows what he's talking about. Guitarist in Linkin Park puts a video on and says, look, in front of 85,000 people. She went, who's that?
Yeah.
You know, so kids don't realize these things because something's changed. You know, it's like the reset is being built up to happen again because, you know, we mentioned on the show a few times about the Cabbage Patch Kids from the 1800s, the orphan trains that got dispersed to all these cities that were like fully developed, but there was a man there with an awesome cart with a spade and, you know, shoveling crap and these monumental buildings, and with no real history for them. It's like history's been grabbed hold of and all the best bits have been taken by the people who've won everything. So when you get an education system after 2 world wars, you've got a real change, and you see those experiments with the music change, the drugs, then the sex, the corruption of society and families, and you see the outcome. These are predictions. These have been written about. You know, these are tried and tested things, but to try and convince people, you see then the Stockholm syndrome being bounced back at you. It's you know, I've seen it, family and friends, mate. You know, I as I've said before, when I became born again Christian, everybody virtually congratulated me. You know, are you Catholic? You know, they have to, you know, but then you tell them the gas is free, mate. Phew, they don't want to speak to you ever again.
Yeah, well, I think I just want to come back to this degradation of religion into morality. Morality is degradation when we lose the relational aspects. And what happens then politically is when you've got morals, we mentioned it last week, you get a further corruption in the political arena and cultural arena, because people will then say, right, well, there's two different variants, actually. All these people who believe in diversity, this is what the Greens are about and others. They push the diversity agenda, but when they're pushing diversity, what they're really saying is we're all the same. Because we're all the same. Because we're all the same. In other words, we're just human. Therefore, you treat every human the same. So they erase diversity. But then you get people like on the so-called far right, that gets labelled the far right, who say, no, we're all different. So they're the ones, so the people on the so-called far right with the racists and bigots are the ones who actually believe that we are all different. That therefore, equality is a myth. So what you get with a degradation of morality is you get equality, you get social justice, which is so vague and ethereal, it doesn't mean anything. Then you get like people referring to the parable of the Good Samaritan about treating people properly. Well, of course you should treat people properly, but it doesn't mean you should treat everybody the same. But what does it even mean, say, to treat everybody the same? That's what, well, no, you've got to treat that trans man to woman as if she's a woman, because we're all the same. Therefore, she should be able to compete. She should be able to compete with the women. But we all know that none of the women want to go and compete with the men because they'll never win a bean. There'll be also rounds. So it only works in one direction. And does it work? It works to compensate for those who are perceived to be at the bottom of the food chain. So the Greens support the working classes. The working classes are not going to disagree with that, are they? It's a no-brainer against the billionaires. So this grievance politics that Keir Starmer's always accusing Farage of, in particular, the same grievance politics is being used, and nobody bats an eyelid at its grievance politics when it's against the billionaires in favour of the working classes and the poor. So all the time, these systems work in favour of marginalised groups, but they don't really work in favour of marginalised groups. They leverage those marginalised groups as concepts. They're not actually real people. They're concepts that are weaponised. So anyone who's unfortunate is equal with the person who's a multi-billionaire, who's been productive, who's contributed to society. And yes, they might have had privileges. So what? What does the word privilege mean? What is their output? What are they contributing? So what you get this stupid demographic, and you get the whole idea of the Greens jumping on it. You know, there they were in London. You know, and this Polanski's going Alu Akbar. You know, talking about our trans friends, and he's just mishmashing everything together. And as we know, it's a bit of a cliche to say, yeah, and many of these Islamists, hardcore ones, will be throwing Polanski off, you know, a 5-story building. But he's still advocating for him, because this is the derangement of this level of moral degradation. It says basically, because we're all so different, that's what makes us all the same. Therefore, the policy should treat everybody the same. Therefore, it doesn't matter if 4, 5, 6, 7 million poor people from another country come and invade your country. That's not an invasion. How can you talk like that? These poor people are no worse than us. They deserve the same human rights as us. And therefore, all this stuff talking about human rights, talking about equality, talking about these things that nobody could appear to disagree with as being a bad thing, they get weaponized to justify these policies. That could only be born in the mind of a complete retard. But they're everywhere, and they're running the clown show. So while somebody like Zach Polanski and the Greens are around, incredible, and people are working with them, you know we're screwed.
I saw that a former Islamist said that when because he became Christian, and he said that as a Muslim he would always vote for the left, the liberal, because they weren't bothered. It was everybody was equal. You know, I saw earlier this week where a trans woman, a trans for Palestine, went to a Palestinian march and got attacked by Muslims for being trans. We don't want you type of people here. No, I'm on your side. We don't want you. You're disgusting. You know, and people can't see that is being pushed. That's an agenda, that all this stuff is mixed in. Well, when you see the state of what society is, where anybody can be anything, and it's all, there's no naturalness to anything, because you can tell it's all been manufactured. And when you get into a society like this is where it's conquered. It's all divided. You know, there's no consistency. Heritage has been erased. This is genocide by government policy. And we've been taught to fund it, Alex. You know, my mum taught me this stuff. I did an article about where my mum was a great acting as a debtor. She ran businesses. You know, don't pay them until they're due it, you know, all that kind of stuff. But she just carried it on into a private life because she wasn't taught the opposite. Nobody is. So when you go and understand that stuff, and then you stand there, I honestly stood there, Alex, and thought, you're going to do this because you'd be committing fraud. Because here I am presenting it, you know what I'm doing. And then I watched what they did. And you just realize how big that was. You know, I could never understand how not paying your bills was the right thing to do. People didn't find that important. But everybody could afford to pay the bills when I was telling them. Now they can't afford it. They want to know what that secret button was that you pressed to make it all go away, and will somebody do it for them? That's been taken away from them because you corner people. So that's how people react. I've spoken to people I met recently who, during COVID, this stuff just came to them because they had time when they put it together. Now they've got together, they've got a network that they want to challenge stuff, and they're going in on high levels. You know, I've spoken to a lot of people. I've told the story about the billionaire who was speaking to me about having some like 8 billion trying to be siphoned off through the city of London, and I'm talking about 100 grand 3-bed semi-detached. It was a bit of a difference, but you could see that we were both in the same boat. You know, it was strange that everybody, no matter rich, poor, we're all in the same boat. We're all beholden to what system we've been bred into. And, you know, we're on the farm, mate. We don't even know we're on a farm because we can go into that field sometime. And if they open that gate, we can go there as well. We're free.
Yeah.
We can go anywhere in those fields.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's quite easily done. Let's see if we can put some patterns together, because we've got some history stuff here, and let's see if you can see a pattern amongst any of these, mate. If I can get it right. Austrian painter.
Ah, yeah.
Conflict and hatred between nations is being fostered by certain interested parties. It is a small, rootless international clique that incites nations against each other, that does not want them to find peace. These are the people who are at home everywhere and nowhere, who have no roots anywhere, who have not grown from any soil, but who may live in Berlin today, just as easily be in Brussels tomorrow, the day after in Paris, and then again in Prague or Vienna or London, and who feel at home everywhere. They are the unique actors who can truly be described as international elements, because they actively conduct their business in almost every place in the world.
Can anybody in the chat hear me? Because I'm looking at this blank screen. All I can see is a blank screen and Yeshua Hashemayach across the bottom of it. So if people can hear me, if you could let us know in the chat. Otherwise, I don't know what's happened. I think someone's commented about how the live has been cut. It appears to still be live to me. I don't know if anyone can hear this, but it's very, very odd. Don't know what this is. Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, great, fantastic. Right, so this is a bit eerie, guys, because I'm looking at a screen on a mobile phone on a live. I can't really see the comments at the moment because I've gone back to the screen trying to see what could be going on with Paul. So we are live. That video cut out. That I'm presuming it was a reel. It's cut out. No sign of Paul. But we still appear to be on the show. But I'm still on it. Hey up. Hey up. It looks like a reboot. Mr. Webster, are you back? Is there anybody there? It was getting a bit interesting, that, Paul, for a minute.
Yeah, I don't know. So somebody in the chat room said whoever we were talking about shut us down. It's a good job nobody's running the world or anything like that, mate.
Well, for a while, I was just looking at it for a while, thinking, because I couldn't see myself. I could just see the black screen, and I thought I better speak. I went to comments. I thought I'll see if they can hear me because they couldn't see me. Yeah, so even now, have you still got some technical gremlins at your end?
Why?
Well, obviously we've not got anything on the screen now.
What do you mean not on the screen? We're back on YouTube. You're
Oh,
not
right, no,
on camera.
the screen's gone blank since the video was played. It's all black. That's what everyone's saying.
Yeah, well, I couldn't hear you. I was booted.
Yeah,
I got booted. So yeah, the screen went black because I was sharing a screen and I got booted.
Right, yeah, it was bizarre. So we're back, right? Okay. Are you going to risk this again?
I'm going to try again, mate. Give me a minute.
Right.
Give me a minute.
Try again.
The conflict and hatred between nations is being fostered by certain interested parties. It is a small, rootless international clique that incites nations against each other, that does not want them to find peace. These are the people who are at home everywhere and nowhere, who have no roots anywhere, who have not grown from any soil, but who may live in Berlin today, just as easily be in Brussels tomorrow, the day after in Paris, and then again in Prague or Vienna or London, and who feel at home everywhere. They are the unique actors who can truly be described as international elements, because they actively conduct their business in almost every place in the world. The conflict and hate.
Any idea who they're talking about?
Oh, I would like to hazard a guess.
No, well, let's see further. Let's see further.
Who knows the first two laws that Hitler implemented? Who knows the first two laws? Before the Nuremberg laws. Before that, we're talking about years before it. Hitler first comes into power. What's the first two laws? Okay, I'll save you the time. Rule number 1. No more pornography. No more homosexuality. None of that garbage. Not allowed. Berlin in the 30s, in the 20s, was the Sodom and Gomorrah of the day. Homosexuality, pornography, all the bestiality, all the garbage of the world, that was the capital of the world. He outlawed it. You're no longer allowed, closed all the bars, all the gay clubs, all the production, which were all run by Jewish people, unfortunately. Second rule, you're not allowed to charge interest. No more interest. Now you would think, why? What does he care about interest? Well, because all the people that had the money to lend the money out were Jews. So he said no more interest. Why? Because of the high interest that the Jews charged people was so high, it ruined, it destroyed the economy in Germany. They destroyed, just like they destroyed Russia a few years before that through their communism over there. Jews destroyed Russia, not Goyim. Jews destroyed. Communism is by Jews. Well, don't let anybody confuse. All the other Reshaim, they're all Jews. Wicked, but nonetheless Jews. They destroyed Russia, and he wrote in chapter 2 of Mein Kampf, they destroyed Russia, now they're destroying Germany. Go to the store to buy bread, you had to take a whole horse carriage full of money. By the time you arrive at the store, it wasn't enough. Why? Because the inflation rate was so high. The bread became so much more valuable and your money went down. And at that time, the Great Depression was happening around the entire world. Everyone was in a financial collapse. America was a financial collapse. England was a financial collapse. Germany collapsed worse than everybody else. But after he passed this law, within 6 years, Germany became the leading, wealthiest economy in the world. They called it a financial miracle. Why? They were the only ones that were bold enough to stop interest. This is one of the biggest reasons of why he hated Jews. Because they destroyed the economy because of their greed.
So it's a really good job that none of these have anything to do with anything going on in the world, like Barbara Spector said last week about Europe going into multiculturalism. You know, they're going to be a leading light. Are we seeing patterns here, Alex, from history? Yeah. Because all this has got to be interlinked. But is that rabbi there, is he anti-Semitic? Is he a self-hating Jew? Is he speaking exactly what happened? You know, we've got to be able to not have that parroted, taught tradition and be able to go and ask those questions. If you are reacting emotionally to something that could change a factual thing, that's the one thing that I've always had, Alex, that if I have information that contradicts what I believe, I can't pretend. You know, it's not in my nature. It's, oh, I'm going to have to deal with that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, go on, sorry, I interjected.
Well, obviously, the Jewish people, based on their religion, if you take the religious frame, there were indictments against charging money at interest, usury. So actually,
What we've got to understand, sorry for interjecting again, mate, but what we've got to understand is these are the ones who aren't Jews.
yeah,
These are the ones that even Jesus says is the synagogue of Satan. They're not the Jews, but they're being used. But we see a pattern here, and it's nothing to do with a religion. It's a pattern that's forming around those religions that are being used. And we see that we're all have been groomed into our own sections of it. We were all separate, but now through that multiculturalism, through that diversity, they've spread it into everything. So now we don't have those things. And anybody who does identify differently is going to be under attack. So if you say if I'm Jewish, look at the Jews that are being under attack now. They've got the Muslims attacking them. They've got the Jews attacking them. These aren't even Jews that are doing it. It's a much bigger plan. But we all get sucked in, don't we, mate?
Well, interestingly, I just checked out. There's three different treatments of usury. In Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. In Exodus, it says, if you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him. In Leviticus, it says, if your brother becomes poor, take no interest from him or profit. You shall not lend him your money at interest, nor give him your food for profit. And in Deuteronomy 23, it says, you shall not charge interest on loans to your brother. To a foreigner, you may charge interest, but to your brother, you shall not charge interest. So they probably, because I was thinking at first, how do they justify using that Jewish frame if they're running totally contrary to what the Torah teaches? But you can see there in Deuteronomy, the last of those three texts, that it does actually say that it is permissible to charge interest to a foreigner. So maybe that is what they're exploiting.
Well, I always remember somebody asked me once how many Jews that I'd dealt with in jail. And I said, well, quite a few if you go off what they register as, because a kosher meal's a little bit better and separate to the ordinary prisoners' meals. So we had a lot of people who claimed to be Jewish. I said, but I only ever had one who was like a practicing ringlet type of whatever Jew that type of Jew that is, because I did have a lot of people who followed Judaism, but one who was in there, he was in there to be taught a lesson because he was too busy messing about, and whatever he was involved in, they allowed him to go to jail. He treated it as an holiday. I'll be honest with you, he just treats it like an holiday camp, walking into pads with like gangbangers in there and just sitting down on the toilet saying, what's up then, lads? You know, he honestly treated it like a holiday. But stories about where fathers had bankrupted their own sons and then invited them for dinner and then was upset because they decided that they weren't going to come for dinner because it was only business. You know, I think it's more of a lifestyle and more of an ideology again. That's why you've got the Torah being prized away and being replaced with the Talmud. You've got it in other religions where they've replaced it with something else. Again, we go back to what are you standing on? If we say the scriptures are the word of God, if we say that is the truth, then every religion that says they follow that, we've got to be able to analyze it. Why do you come to the conclusions that you come to? Why do you have to go around and say convert or die if it's the truth? Because these scriptures don't say that. You get people who point to the Catholics and say, look at the Crusades, look at how they spread Christianity. That's not Christianity then, obviously, because the Bible doesn't say go and do that. So we've got all this melting pot, all these opinions, all these traditions. Where do you start? You know, for me, like I said, Alex, it was well, you know full well, it was a breakdown event. Everything in your life is just, that's all those experiences that I had. It was all based on stuff that I didn't really know about and I had no control over. And so many people, because for years, I weren't interested in politics, and I can still hear my mum's voice saying, well, politics is interested in you. And you think, and a bit to work out how deep and how far back this goes. It's nothing new under the sun, mate.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I'm watching a little bit as you're talking Martin's comments, and I was wondering what his beef was. I think he might have identified as Jewish in the past, but I don't know in what respect. And obviously, he's come up with this quip: from not paying your council tax to Hitler worship, worst sailor for a modern day. And that's is it a viewer or viewpoint? I don't know.
No, but it's a bit strange. It's a bit strange to say about worship, isn't it? When you're only stating what historically is going on. It's got nothing to do with hatred at all. Nothing to do with hatred. Nothing to do with worship. It's to do with, because we've got the same beef with the Catholics as we have with the Nazis. You know,
is it not about history? Is
yes,
it not about history? What we're saying is, we've got these false histories that we've been given. So, for example, like I have no skin in the game. I don't have much of an opinion about, like you were saying at the start of the show, you know, these traditions that go off and do what they do with Easter. I have my own pragmatic approach to that. Yeah, I know it's not desirable, but it doesn't bother me too much. It's the same with Hitler. I look at it and I kind of go, yeah, what's the big deal? One way or the other. It just doesn't really. I mean, but I can see the point, because I think the point that's interesting is we are given historical frames by people that portray good guys and bad guys in a particular way to support an ongoing narrative. So to criticize that isn't to engage, from what I can see, in Hitler worship. I mean, like I say, I've got no skin in the game. I can see that it could get overstated. I could see that it could be more complex than it's being made out. But the bottom line is, when a narrative is totally dominated, which it has, I think even in Germany, you can't even, in Germany to this day, you could get arrested if we were broadcasting the show from Germany, you know, arrest could be made. And that's really interesting. Because I don't see any of this as anti-Semitic. I just see it as an alternative theory or an alternative history that's different to what the history book suggests. I don't see it as being anti-Jewish. I see it being a particular construal of a certain configuration of Jewishness that's being defined in a particular way that has very little to do with a genuine Jew who I
don't know what that is. What is that, Alex?
In the strict sense, a genuine Jew, for me, it's not ethnic, it's not biological, it just isn't. Like, for example, if you're a Muslim, you're not a Pakistani. If you're Christian, you're not English. You know, so there's no connection. So if it's the religion, right? So Jewish, yeah, okay. So there was the ethnicity originally, but if you talk about Judaism and the Jewish faith, and a true Jew then is somebody who believes in Yahweh, who practices the old religion, the festivals.
So do we just see? Do we see a pack of chameleons going through different countries, going in different guises, whether it be Jews, whether it be communists, whether it be this, whether it be that? They just seem to be all the elements what they need to be able to bleed the system dry.
Maybe that's the point, mate. Like you say in Synagogue of Satan, where people use this phrase from Revelation 2 and 3. They just appropriate that.
I don't think
But
it
the
comes down to ethnics and stuff.
No, the reality is somebody would be doing a ventriloquism show and wanting to blame Jews by taking the role of Jews, doing things to people so that they could benefit, and then the Jews would copy it. So you could actually be, you could be in both camps at the same time. You could attack the so-called Jews who are not Jews, and thereby restore what a genuine Jew might be if they hadn't been maligned by this whole agenda with people masquerading as Jews to frame Jews, maybe.
Have you noticed that if all of those people in all those religions and all those creeds followed the word of God, none of that would be relevant. Not a bit of it. No colour, no creed, no ideology, nothing, because it takes away all that. It doesn't matter the ethnicity, because he says it's my way. You come this way, it's the only way. So there is no Judaism, Buddhism, there's none of that. There's only this way. You see all the religions now saying every religion goes to God. And he still stood there on his own saying, I'm the only way. You know, that's very strange, Alex, to be able to stand there after all this time. You know, why is this not being got rid of? Why does it still stand out with all the so-called translations, with all the faults, with all the man becoming gods and stuff like that? Why is this still stood there on its own, standing out, saying the same thing that it always has, and everything else seems to mold to the same? You know, we asked about, we spoke on one show about sin. It didn't matter how little the sin was, you might as well have done the biggest. It's all the same. You can't get it back. There's no way to be redeemed. And we have that propensity to just take it that one step too far. You know, it's like getting to 50, saying that the 50 is the limit. And just as you're going to ring the bell, you do something. You know, you're done. And there's only one way out of that, is this way. I've done it. So nobody can boast about it. Nobody has to do something and click the reels together 3 times. That makes sense in, you know, all these scriptures that are written, all these languages, in all these translations that don't contradict each other compared to everything else. You can only see that all these liars and something like that looks, well, what does it look like? It's quacking. It's certainly not a cow, mate. You know, it stands out. So that's what tweaked the interest, because it was so obviously logical, but you just had to believe, and that was the difficult thing. And that's a battle. That's a battle to understand that. You know, some people might say that when you're born again, you just suddenly have the faith. You're certainly on. You know, you're aware. You think you're untouchable, but then this world doesn't like that, because it's for a different reason. You need this world. You need Vanity Fair. Look at the lights, mate. You need this, and that's what we've been groomed into.
Yeah, well, I think we've got to ask, regardless if somebody tried to say that there could be other religions that provide a valid frame, any one of those religions that are touted to do so would need to give a coherent, first of all, would need to give a coherent account for where evil came from and what the remedy is to that evil. And it'd have to be rationally credible. And in order for it to be credible, it has to, first of all, be plausible. So any religion, Christianity, Jesus Christ, the message about Jesus Christ, provides a diagnosis of what the problem is and provides a solution to what the problem is that affects every human being that's ever walked on the face of this earth. So that's a big deal. I don't see any other claim anywhere within any religion where that diagnosis is made, the description of where evil comes from is addressed, the solution or the remedy to the consequences of that evil happens to be addressed. I just don't see that anywhere else. So any religion that can't give an account for these things, what purpose does it serve? Christianity does give an account for those things, and it gives an answer to what the problems are and how the evil is remedied. So there isn't any other religion that has an answer to that question, from what I can see, that even proposes one. It kind of says, you know, really do the right thing, be wise in this way, don't do the wrong thing. But what about the fact that we're not capable of acting that way? How do we deal with the addiction that some people have, say, to, let's just say, to pornography, let's just say, for sake of example? How do we deal with the addictive part of that so that we stop doing it? What would it take for that to disappear? And some people might say, oh, it doesn't matter, a bit of porn. But if they think that, they've not been alive very long. They're entitled to think it. But I don't see any other religion that does anything other than condemn something, like just condemns it. Doesn't provide an answer, doesn't show you how that can stop, just says you shouldn't do it, and if you don't stop doing it, you're going to go to hell. Certain versions of Christianity can just emphasize that part without emphasizing the remedy, and without looking at the problem of human nature. Human nature needs to be revamped, cleansed, purified, transformed. We can't do it ourselves. No matter how we try, we just can't do it.
Catholicism was good at that, condemning everything, but not giving anybody the hope. You know, it's so strange that,
if you had enough money, you could pay to have your sins absolved.
I know this is the strange thing. That's why, you know, growing up, and some of my mates were Catholics. They were meant to believe the same stuff I was taught. But they did different things, you know, different ways. Like they went and sat in a box and talked to an old bloke. I was told not to go and sit in boxes and talk to old blokes. You know, it was also my mum said, "Oh, well, we don't really know," type thing. You know, I never really got a chance to ask my dad about stuff. I was too busy rebelling at that time. But, you know, it's strange that, again, I go back to those words. If these words don't mean anything, Alex, and they just, you know, copied from copies of what blokes made up, well, that means we're just only better than, we're only as good as the last lie that we were taught. And it's just going to be that forever until it ends. And then, well, what happens when we die? Well, we've got all these things that we can do, you know, for remedy. And then the best one of all is, well, God loves us all and he knows our hearts, and we're all just going to be taken home at the end of the day. So it means, well, you can do what you want then, you know, and then you see society, when we do what we want with no boundaries, we see Mad Max, Hunger Games, Running Man stuff coming round the corner, but it won't happen here, you know. And we look back in our history and we see patterns, you know, and it's not picking on ethnic groups. We're seeing a group of people that have made these, you know, we noticed from 47 to 49, from the CIA to Israel to Mossad, all being formed. 1953, Iran regime to change over. That's a lot happening after World War II, when we've been at war for all that time, Alex. What's going on?
Yeah, exactly. We've got to suspect that things have been going on behind the scenes. We had the Suez Crisis in 1956 as well. It seems like the same playbook is used over and over again. I mean, ultimately, I'm really, I have to say, I'm fascinated to see. When I saw Steve this morning, and I could see that for a guy who can look after himself and isn't given to being intimidated by very much, he had a lot of anxiety, and you know, I can't relate to it. I mean, maybe somebody will say, "Oh yeah, well, you will be able to do when you can't eat, you're facing imminent starvation." I don't think it's going to get to that. I think there's just going to be some really big fallout, and it could lead to people on the streets for sure. But I'm curious about trying to kind of uncovering what the plan, the agenda is. You know, like, what do they think is going to happen if they get everybody on the street? Because you know, there's probably 70 million people in this country. I mean, who are they going to be coming out against? How are the politicians not going to end up getting strung up? I don't see
Well, this
anything
is the point, though.
going to manage it.
The politicians aren't the issue. They are, you know, they are bagmen. They are the in-betweens. But Keir Starmer's making no decisions. He's not being told what to do. We're always picking fights with the people that are nothing. Those positions should be filled with people who are the populist. This is the problem that we've got. How would you ever get a populist in this system? Well,
you can't,
because the system's designed for one central control. That's all it's about, because it's got to be the copied version of God's system. It's got to be that. It's got to be, you know, the beast opening the pit, everything under his, you know, that's where we're heading. All the digital stuff points to it, Alex. Palantir, all these companies are collecting all our data. Atos has been doing it for years, mate.
Yeah.
You know, and then you've got the Page attack that opens all these files. Oh yeah, but they've got to get these warrants and stuff like that. You see people, you know, who used to work for the CIA, who used to say we'd have to get it to take us weeks to get a warrant to put a wiretap on. And now you get Alexa, and we can get access to all that stuff. Alexa's testified in court because she recorded a murder, you know, but they don't listen. But yeah. You know, and I've got friends who use Alexa a lot, and they can listen. All they're going to do is, well, I forgot this for my shopping. I lead a really boring life. That's the apathy that this system wants, because these people are good, hardworking people. You know, but they've been taught this system, and to say that this system's wrong, that means they've done all this work for nothing. And all the work that they've done, all the property, the equity, it could go like that because the equity is not registered. And for them to say, I didn't know it, that's going to be used against them. And it could leave, as you just said, you've seen people on the streets. The opposite is thousands could be on the street.
Yeah. No, this is what I mean.
How are we going to get to that? We talk about vibrations and frequencies. I mean, is Steve creating a reality where he's going to have to prep? Has he dug tunnels that he's interconnected with half of Europe and, you know, set up rat lines to do supplies and stuff? Because this stuff has happened throughout history. You know, they've never cut everybody off. It's always changed to something. But for some reason, they believe they've got something in place. When you look at this digital system and this 5G going on 6G system, and you see people who've been involved in these vaccination programs talking about putting operating systems into the body, because mRNA is an operating system that's going to instruct your biological immune system. So you are putting your own operating system into a human body. You see the Supreme Court recognizing a third entity, male, female, and other. Is that just for all the furry babies and all that kind of stuff? I think we're going into that society where there was, what you were saying was neither male or female. Well, that's the angelic, isn't it? We're just marrying, not marrying. It's none of that. It's got to be mirrored. So you get all this Luciferian stuff. You see all these connections, mate. But Coronation Street's on you, talking to your mate who's wanting play darts and things like that. It's strange because all that stuff's still going on. But you see, this has happened in history. What's going to stop it repeating if people don't talk about it? And when you haven't got people who are talking about it, you get the apathy. You get it's too late now. What do I do? I don't know.
I think as well we should talk again about the youthful idiots, because they're a huge part of why we have the problem that we have. And I was thinking earlier actually about youthful idiots, because, you know, at the end of the day, if you think about somebody you know, like say Ed Miliband is a good example of a useful idiot, really good example. Well, so is Tony Blair. Now, there's a difference between them. And you remember the old vampire movies where the vampire, who was like a Dracula-esque type figure or a Nosferatu, would often have a familiar. And the
Yes.
familiar was often portrayed as like, yes, he was human, but also you got this impression that he was a little
was
bit
in
more than
between.
human. Yeah, he was on the, and his big dream was to be converted, to be turned by his master. Now, to me, that's the difference between Ed Miliband, who's just a useful idiot, and Tony Blair, who's a familiar. Because Tony Blair is much more dangerous. And he's a much more useful idiot for them. Because he really believes, like, so he's a real Tory. He wants to be a vampire. Look, he knows he isn't.
There's a lot of
but he wants
ranks.
he wants to be one. Whereas Ed Miliband, if he knew, he'd think, oh, I don't want that. He's bought into some of the ideology because it benefits him. Part of his belief system will really believe it. So he's a dupe, but he's not like that sort of familiar dupe. So if we're going to turn the ship around, you're never going to turn your familiars around because they aspire to be part of the Dracula club. So they're a layer beneath the overall oligarchs, and then you've got your general useful idiots. So I think we're going to have to try and somehow get the useful idiots who are not familiars, enough of them to wake up. You could argue that Andrew Bridgen at one point, when he was in his political career, was a useful idiot, and something happened that made him wake up, and he started to look at things differently. Now he's exposing the other useful idiots, and he used to be one. So
he did actually say in that talk at Burnley that he did actually say that he bought into all the COVID stuff at one point. He actually believed it all, and then it got changed. He said that's when everything kicked off. But again, is this a planned thing? You've got to ask those questions. But the man's doing the tour. He's talking the talk. You've got to listen to the information.
Yeah, but even then, I mean, he's one useful idiot who changed at best. We'd have to change a lot of it, like the Miliband, because Miliband's policy.
He did mention the winter fuel allowance being withdrawn, which, you know, gave me a bit of Tourette's.
Yeah. Well, if you look at Miliband's policy that Starmer's hiding behind on not opening up drilling in the North Sea, which would solve the problem. But again, militantly refusing to do that because of a policy when everybody can see that if there's a shortage and we have access to it, the Norwegians themselves are accessing the same fields, but we buy it off them. So we let them drill. We refuse to because we're adhering to a policy, and then we have to pay over the odds to get it off the Norwegians when we could get it direct ourselves. Now, if that carries on for too long, the insanity of that, holding on to a policy when it's affecting our fuel prices, our people, and everything else, is going to lead to a problem. Now, is that going to make Ed Miliband change his policy? Probably not. He might be forced to do it. But in theory, certain people can wake up because Andrew Bridgen did. But people like Blair never will. Now, Miliband is not Blair. So in theory, there's a hope for somebody like him. What we have to do, we have to try and get enough of the useful idiots to recognise that what they're doing is utterly self-defeating. Unfortunately, until it comes to Miliband's own house, his own household, his own people, his own priorities, he'll continue to do what his masters want him to do while he thinks he's really serving the greater good. He believes passionately he's saving the planet. So he's just a delusional. But if he actually saw the truth, he'd probably change. Unlike Blair, he wouldn't change.
I think Blair was I don't know what you would call it, chosen, whatever, a long time ago, but he's definitely on the arse end of everything. He's a war criminal. We've got all these war criminals, Alex, you know, and we've got this turning against Trump and turning against Israel. We've got all this kind of rumbling, wars and rumours of wars, it seems to just keep echoing that this plan, this play is being played out. It has been written. We've just got to keep our eye on it. Are we watching? Are we going to see what actors come along next? Because whilst we're arguing whether Nigel Farage is going to come in and save the economy, you know, are we losing our eternity? I mean, things are coming closer and closer together. People are so stuck where we're at, you know. I don't mind saying again that it was despair that showed me that this world is all bought and paid for. You haven't got a clue when you're born into it. You think you get an angle on it, but you don't actually know. You know, it's like playing the bandits. You win a few quid, you think, hey, you know how to play these bandits.
Yeah.
But I know people who've ran a lot of slot machines and stuff like that, and they're not poor, you know. They're always on the winning side.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I'm just coming back to Blur, thinking that it's interesting this theologically, because I'd argue that he's a Luciferian. If he's a familiar, he's a Luciferian because he seeks to ascend. And that is the heart of the matter. That's the heart of it, I think.
I did have a few more clips, but we're running out of time, so I'll just play a couple of these clips because, as I said, we're looking at patterns, we're looking at events and how things. These are dots. These are dots. People need to start looking at how these events have come about, why they're called. Look at the names. The names are quite memorable. I've always remembered the names, but I never knew the significance. If it works.
True governments actually stage attacks against their own allies to justify wars, and we have documented proof.
Oh yeah, Stewie. They call them false flag attacks. It's when you blame someone else for something you did yourself to start a war.
And this actually worked in real conflicts?
Dude, in 1931, Japan faked an explosion in Manchuria to invade China. In 1962, the U.S. planned fake Cuban attacks called Operation Northwoods, but JFK stopped it.
Good lord, that's rather sinister.
In 1946, Zionist terrorists dressed as Arabs bombed the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. Unalived 91 people, including 28 British.
Wait, terrorists founded Israel?
Yeah, 3 groups: Irgun, Leahy, and Haganah. They're recognized as terrorist organizations today. The guy who led that bombing, Menachem Begin, became prime minister later.
But allies don't attack allies.
Tell that to the USS Liberty crew. June 8, 1967, Israeli jets attacked this American spy ship in international waters for over 2 hours. The ship's flag and hull number were clearly visible. They unalived 34 Americans, wounded 171 out of 294 crew. Israel jammed their distress calls. President Johnson and Defense Secretary McNamara actually recalled U.S. rescue planes, leaving them to die.
Why would Johnson abandon American sailors?
He was allegedly having an affair with an Israeli spy named Matilda Krim. Survivors say it was deliberate, but Israel claimed mistaken identity and paid compensation.
So we just let them get away with murdering our troops?
The crew begged for retaliation, but none came. Israel got exposed because the Liberty survived when it wasn't supposed to. That's the only reason we know. Are you noticing yet?
Patterns, Alex?
Well,
was there any of that anti-Semitic? Any of it?
No, but obviously it can be portrayed easily as such because, you know, people confuse Jewishness, biology, ethnicity, the state, different, you know, we know the whole thing about Sephardic Jews versus Ashkenazi. We know all this, and it's the big field in which people are stomping around. And, you know, there are corrupt actors everywhere. And to me, it doesn't really matter who they are. They're just corrupt actors. People used to talk about, you know, Club of Rome, Bilderberg Group, meet once a year. Is anyone really bothered whether they're from Saudi Arabia, Japan, out to Mongolia? Not really. But when you get groups coming together, whether they've got a specific ethnic identity or not, when groups come together and they are organising together against the best interests of everybody else and towards their own best interest, and they're doing so to such a degree they're promulgating masses of harm, maybe genocide and so on. You need to, it's in the interest of everyone who's not on their side to identify what they're doing, who they are. In other words, you have to find some identity markers, and identity markers tend to revolve around shared characteristics that they might possess. So the conspirators against everybody else want to remain covert. They want to remain hidden because if they're exposed, they'd be eradicated. Because small groups can't survive in the face of big institutions, just like governments can't survive in the face of all the populace out on the streets. So they've got to try and stay covert. It's inevitable. They're going to try and decoy and get misidentified, misdescribed, so that people come after the wrong people. But the bottom line is, if any group is going to come together, it doesn't matter if they're all like different licorice all sorts. You'll go, well, all right, then they're all different sides, for different countries, different ethnicities, but we know that they're actually a box of licorice all sorts. So we identified the box of licorice all sorts. We need a label, we need an identity, an umbrella under which we can identify them so that we can expose them and remove them. So just because some people say, yes, there's a strong so-called Jewish aspect, it may be so-called Jewish, it may be associated with Jews falsely, it may be associated with Jews on some level correctly. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that we identify that there's a group doing these things.
Yeah, when you use that term, I think we're looking at another ideology, because when you look at the Talmud, it's away from the Torah. So again, it's something that is away from the word of God. Islam with the hadiths is away from the word of God. But you can't see that without actually having the word of God. And if you're taught that the word of God has been corrupted, yet you rely on that because both do, yet there's an ideology that's going on where, the rabbis teach that the Goyim will be servants to them, and every Jew will have one. Who's a Jew then? Because when you read in the Bible, the Jew is the circumcision of the heart. So that is the born-again Christian. And I put that in speech marks. But the born-again Christian is the Jew. So again, what is Jew? How is it anti-Semitic? Because Semitism is based on Arabs and Eastern, and you've got these people who seem to go everywhere, and they seem to not have control of a lot of things. So when you can't talk about something like that, or if it's illegal, it should put up flags. But there's so much trauma gone on in society. I don't think it's easy to point that out to people. And yet
I think
we're seeing now where even newscasters from this country put Netanyahu on the spot and said that you are committing war crimes. You're committing genocide. You cut water off to these people. You cut food off to these people. You've done all this stuff, and he just sat there and took it. He wrote in the 90s about the Islamists, fundamental Islam could take down the World Trade Center, and it just so happens. And you see how many standing ovations does he get in American Congress? Yet if he goes into certain countries, he's going to get arrested. There's something going on that we just don't know about, but we're still watching the play.
All groups, I think, all groups of whatever stripe that aspire to rule the world are delusionals. But there's a fair number of delusionals. There are power-hungry megalomaniacs, and you're not going to get rid of them just because you're a decent person and it annoys you, or you protest about it a little bit, or even if you pray, because there's a lot of people on the face of the planet, and there's a lot of people with inflated egos. So if you get a few of them coming together, believing that they're entitled, I mean, it's the same old story of entitlement. It's popular for people on YouTube channels to talk about my narcissistic partner or my narcissistic ex, and then explore all the characteristics and go, well, it's clearly them, it's not me. Everybody wants to portray everybody else as a narcissist, but we do know that there are narcissists. And the point is they're entitled. And if they've got money and power and they're well connected, they're much more dangerous than your common garden narcissist walking around messing a few people up. They could mess a hell of a lot of people. It's the same old problem, like, entitlement and delusionality. And unfortunately, whatever name they go by, whatever, label that we ascribe to them, whatever their identity happens to be, they're dangerous. And they need to be exposed.
How we'll expose it to the core then, because you had this week Muslims, I think it was in Iran, doing a protest where they set fire to a bull image of Baal with the star of Remphan in the Israeli flag on the bull, and set fire to it because they were claiming that the Israelis are Baal worshippers, which is the star of Remphan, which is Moloch worship, Baal worship, right? Yet the Kaaba used to be worshipped on a pagan god called Hubal, which is Baal worship. So Baal was condemning Baal, if we look at it from a scriptural point of view. So that house can't stand, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
So we see the true core of this stuff. We're arguing about, you mentioned the iceberg the other week. We're talking about the top of the iceberg. What's underneath, mate? What's going to pop the rivets out of the cargo hold where the bombs are to make sure that the Olympic goes down to the bottom?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, mate. By this time next week, it'll be interesting. And by 2 weeks...
We're saying that every week now.
Yeah, no, but it's accelerating. I think it'll be more interesting next week. Probably not decisive, but I think in 2 weeks' time, the Webster report is going to be interesting. So all you viewers who are watching it, when I say all, it might be 20 odd, I don't know, get another 20 odd. Get people on, because it is going to get through to him, and maybe in a couple of weeks' time, people are going to be waiting for the intro, Paul, and to find out, but if nothing else, just to be talking on the chat, because I do think in 2 weeks' time there's going to have been some major shifts.
I certainly think things are speeding up, mate. I'll play this last video and then we'll wrap it up this evening. They're quite well put together. They just explain things quite simply, and I think for me in particular, having it explained in simple terms, it registers a lot better.
How did a tax the rich mayor end up celebrated by billionaire heirs?
Oh, that's Zoran Mamdani, New York's youngest mayor in over a century. He ran on anti-billionaire rhetoric, rent freezes, and free transit. But George Soros' foundation donated over $37 million to groups backing him.
The irony is rather thick, isn't it?
Gets weirder. Before the election, Trump called it an Islamo-communist takeover. Mamdani called Trump a fascist. Then after he won, they met at the White House in November 2025 like best friends. He even met with Chabad Lubavitch rabbis. Those Jews digging tunnels under New York City.
From enemies to cordial chums overnight?
Oh, and his mom, Mira Nair, she appeared in the 2026 Epstein documents for attending a 2009 after-party at Ghislaine Maxwell's townhouse with Bill Clinton and Jeff Bezos.
Good Lord, it's all connected.
Alex Soros literally posted a photo from his penthouse saying he voted for Mamdani. Despite his anti-Israel campaign talk, he got tons of Jewish donor support after winning.
So left versus right is just theater?
Left wing, right wing, two wings of the same kosher bird, Stewie. They fight on camera, then shake hands backstage while your taxes fund their agenda. It's one big club and we ain't in it. Are you noticing yet?
Patterns, Alex.
Yeah.
So the thing is, we're all seeing the show. Taylor says it every week. We're just watching this play out. But to go along with it and think that they've got something good planned for the majority of people, when every player in this show so far of any stature at least has pushed for all these changes that we've had. Trump didn't stop the vaccines. RFK was going to stop all this stuff about vaccines with autism, but he's not stopping all vaccines. So it's all this. You can lie as a politician type stuff. It's just all an act. They're all acting in roles, and we're all acting in this sea of commerce where their rules go. And if we don't know their rules, those rules stand. So if those rules stand and we don't know them, that's going to make life pretty difficult when the banker always wins in that game. You don't see a bank bankrupt. They just write it on a piece of paper, mate. That's all they've done. And they've stole all the equity by clouding the titles. But there's no point in correcting that, is there? So for me, Alex, we've been clouded in this title since the doctor smacked your ass and you took your first breath. You've been clouded on that because your parents were clouded, their parents were clouded. After two world wars and an education system, then a psychological attack, forever going to wars that didn't need to be. America's been at war since World War One. They manufactured things. We've had their own generals come out and warn against the military-industrial complex. We've had these factions for a long time. They've set a lot of things up in place, and we've paid for most of it. And hopefully now that people are waking up, we can understand that the tip of the iceberg is not what we need to be focusing on right now. So that's my 2 penny for the evening, mates. Wrap us up.
Well, like I've said, it's going to be a major. What you were saying about these deadlines, the whole claim being made that Europe's going to run out of oil by, what is it, the 15th?
10th.
10th, all right, 10th. Well, there you go, so in 5 days. So certainly by next Sunday, we'll see whether that's come to pass. Not much changes. I don't think any of us were expecting this attack on Iran a few weeks ago. And I don't think we were expecting that it would start to unravel in the way that it is. But it's pretty clear now that it's an operation and that it serves multiple purposes, which all play into the hands of the agenda. So whatever's going on, they are rolling out their endgame. And I don't think the solution is to become a prepper, personally. I think that's a fear-driven approach. I understand it, but I don't think it's a solution. I think we've got to be looking somewhere else for our sustenance. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So that's where I'm going to be putting my trust while watching with interest.
Psalm 91.
Exactly.
Thanks for everybody in the chat room who stayed with us through to the end, even with the technical difficulties in between.
Guys.
We appreciate you giving up your time for the evening. And for those of you who are watching it after, the messages and that come along, I've had new people contact me this week who said they were going to, may not make it live, but be having a look at it. So if we're causing people to have questions, share it with people and ask these questions. No such thing as a stupid question if you don't know the answer.
Unless you're Zach Polanski.
Say again.
Unless you're Zach Polanski.
Unless you're Zach Polanski. You really have it down on the greens, you, haven't you?
Oh, big time, yeah.
Anyway, thanks to everybody in the chat. See you again.
Nice. Catch you later.
Lord now comfort. For he grew like a plant in a dry, thirsty ground, with no beauty or comeliness there to be found. Despised and rejected, a man of deep grief, from the sorrows of men he found no relief. We hid as it were all our faces away. He was lightly esteemed in the cold light of day, but he was wounded for what we have done, bruised for iniquities, the Holy One. The peace that we sought on his shoulders was laid, and by his own stripes is our healing displayed. From Paul, son of Thomas, to the generations to be, to Ivan the Great Son, this mercy is free. All we like sheep have gone wandering astray, turned everyone to his own selfish way. But the Lord laid upon him the weight of us all, the iniquity born in the wake of the fall. Oppressed and afflicted, he opened no mouth. From the winds of the north to the dust of the south, as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep that is sheared, he stood in the silence while the judgment appeared. Taken from prison, from judgment and breath, cut off from the living and handed to death. He made his dark grave with the wicked and rich, though no violence was found in the path he did. Yet it pleased the Lord even to bruise him with grief, to make his own soul the offering's relief. He shall see of his seed, and his day shall extend, as the pleasure of God prospers right to the end. He shall see the travail of his soul and be stayed, satisfied by the price that his suffering paid. By his knowledge shall many be justified now, for he bore their iniquities, thorns on his brow. He poured out his soul even unto the grave, numbered with transgressors, the man